I'm glad to be here. How are you doing today? You doing good? Yes, yes. If you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and open up to James chapter 4. We're going to get there later, but we're going to take a quick little detour before we get there. We're doing this series called Community, what it is and how to be one. And one of the questions we're asking is not just how do we get involved here in this small community of believers, which we do want that. We want people involved. We want friendships. We want people getting connected and growing in their faith together. But we also are asking the question is this: how does the community in this church affect the community outside of our church? How do we get involved in just the community at large? And so there's things we have to do where we get connected together, but there's also, you know what? We go to work every single day. Not every day, but every week. And we have a job. We have these skills that we're learning, these skills we're trying to get better at. And things we're trying to do where hopefully what we do in our jobs makes the community at large a better place. And today we're asking the question, so we've been asking the question, how do you go to church? How do you go from church, which Steve did for us, and we did one. How do you go to work? And today we're talking about how to be a neighbor. How do we interact with the world around us where we can say, yes, I'm being a neighbor to the people in my life? Because one of the saying we're saying with this series is this: there's a lot more going on in the communities that we live, work, eat, and play in than simply the fact that we live, work, eat, and play in them. There's more going on. There are things happening that God has put you and me in places so that we could be His ambassadors, His hands and feet, wherever we may go. So the question we're asking today is how to be a neighbor. And we're going to ask it in two questions. One, who is my neighbor? And two, who are my neighbors? You might think it's the same question, but whatever. The Bible places an enormous emphasis on community. A lot of what it has to say involves how you interact, not just as a person, so you can say I'm a good person, but how you interact with each other. And the first time we hear the idea, the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, is in the book of Leviticus. That book of the Bible we always skip. Yes, that one, right? And this is what God says. He says this in chapter 19, verse 18. He says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among the people you live with, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. I love that little tag, thing he puts at the end of it. I am the Lord. It's like the because I said so part of the problem. You know what I mean? I'm a dad, and I am firmly in the but why can't I do this stage of my parenting, and God only knows when it's going to end. And whenever I say comments like that, I look around the room at older parents and see they go, yeah, Garrett, it's not ending anytime soon. And Darren's like, Garrett, I got kids your age, they're still going, but why can't I? And all I'm saying is, but why can't I have kids that don't say, but why can't I? No one got that joke. Oh, well. But here's the deal. I wish I could look at my kids and be like, because I'm the Lord, that's why. Just do it, okay? And God's going, listen, here's how I want you to live with people around you. Because of who I am, because of what I have done for you, because of how I have loved you, this is what I want you to do. Don't hold grudges. Don't get revenge. Rather, love your neighbor as yourself. And that is said one time in the Old Testament, but the New Testament comes around, and it picks it up and says, this is one of the key insights on how to live a godly life. So this thing buried somewhere in Leviticus is one of the key insights on how to live a godly life, how to live with people, how to live in community, how to live in a community, to love your neighbor as yourself, a community that's not holding grudges, it's not hating, it's not getting revenge, but it's loving. And Jesus is going to come around, and he's going to say, this command, along with another one that says, love the Lord your God, are the two greatest commands you will ever find. And on these two commands hang all the law, all the prophets, all those commands that you and I keep being told are how we should live. They can be boiled down to this idea: love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. The book of James calls this command the royal law. It is such a high idea in the mind of the early Christians. They called it the royal law. If anyone keeps the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. Simply put, this is one of the key aspects of how to live a godly life. To love your neighbor as yourself. And that's when things get tricky. How do you love your neighbor as you love yourself? How do we go about doing that? And very often we start to go, well, who is our neighbor? What do we do? How do we decide who our neighbor is and who they're not? And G.K. Chesterton, who is a writer who I love, and if you don't like him, you're going to hear more quotes from him in my time here. So deal with it. G.K. Chesterton said this: one of the most ingenious aspects about this command is that it says, love your neighbor, and not love humanity. It doesn't just say love people. Love the idea of mankind. Want what's best for whoever out there. No, he says love your neighbor, because G.K. Chesterton says that humanity could be anyone. That could just be whoever has the best characteristics that you happen to like, and you go, yes, I'm going to love that person. But your neighbor's got a face, right? Your neighbor's got a personality. Your neighbor doesn't know how to park properly on their driveway. Your neighbor doesn't cut their grass to your liking. Your neighbor is a person. And your neighbor is not your choosing. See, it's really easy to be like, oh, I just care about people. I want what's best. And I think we should just have everybody do X, Y, and Z so that I can just be in charge. And if I'm in charge, I can tell everybody what to do and people will be happy. You can do that over a cup of coffee or on a chat board and put that on your Facebook page. That's easy to do. That's a love humanity thing is easy to do. But when you get in the room with somebody that has some things that you don't particularly like, that's when it gets hard to love your neighbor. Dallas, no, that's not for you. Chuck, I got a story joke. I'm going to try it. I don't normally do these, but if no one else laughs, at least you'll enjoy it, okay? Chuck, have you heard the one about the farmer? That's how you're supposed to start these stories. He had a neighbor that's just a total grump, all right? He is negative about everything. I'm not talking about you if this is you, everything would ever happen, he'd find a reason to be upset about it. It's raining, and the farmer goes to his neighbor and goes, oh, man, can you believe it? We're getting free water for our crops. And he goes, yeah, but it's probably going to flood everything, and it's going to ruin everything. And then the sun's shining. He goes, oh, well, great. Yeah, it's going to scorch all our crops. Great. This is going to be terrible. And every time anything would pop up, and the farmer would always be like, how can I jar this person out of this negativity? And he goes, I got it. I'm going to find something that no one could be negative about. And he goes and buys a dog that can walk on water. And he goes, and they go duck hunting, and they shoot 2 ducks, and they send the dog out there, and he goes running on top of the water. He gets the duck, and he runs back to the boat, nothing wet but his paws. And his neighbor goes, can't even swim. Hey, I did it. Look at that. Oh, my gosh. I'm calling my dad. I did a preacher joke. That's your neighbor. All right, you ever had a conversation with a negative person and you try to physically jar them into thinking something's good, and they go, yeah, but it's probably just not going to be good. And you go, I'm leaving. And that's your neighbor. That's who God is calling us to love. And what's fascinating is that when Jesus comes along, he says, listen, the Old Testament has narrowed this down to where we can go, listen, your neighbor is an actual person. It's got to be someone specific. And then Jesus comes along with this teaching of the Good Samaritan where he shifts everything on its head, and he goes, not only is it someone specific, it could actually, literally be anyone at all. He's teaching one day, and someone asks him what the greatest commands are. He says, I'll give you love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. And the man comes back and says, who's my neighbor? And Jesus goes, I think you know who your neighbor is. But if you're going to be a child about it, I'll treat you like a child. And so instead of getting into a theological debate, he tells him a story. There once was a man, and the man got jumped on the way out of Jerusalem. He was left for dead. There's no way he could possibly survive on his own efforts. But as luck would have it, a priest came walking by. But the priest did not help the man. And then the Levite came walking by. But the Levite did not help the man. And then a low down, dirty, good for nothing, could anything good come from there, Samaritan came walking by. And he got off his donkey. And he bandaged the man. Which, by the way, would be my kids' favorite game to play. Putting Band-Aids on stuff is their favorite thing, by the way. They think they're cool versions of stickers. Anyways, he bandages the man. He puts him on the donkey, takes him to a hotel, pays the man, says, whatever's remaining when I get back, I will pay that too. Just take care of the man. And Jesus asks a question. Which of these people was a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And Jesus, in a stroke of genius, teaches on how to be a neighbor and who your neighbor is, and also reminds us that, as is always the case, you and I tend to ask the wrong questions. We want to know, who's my neighbor? Who is it that I'm responsible to? And Jesus goes, no, that's not the right question. The real question is, who are you willing to be a neighbor to? Are you willing to get out of that shell and be a neighbor? And even if you were crossing paths for a moment, the opportunity is there for you to be a neighbor to someone. It could literally be anyone. This Samaritan and the man who fell among robbers, there was nothing that crossed paths. There's nothing that tied them to each other except for that one moment where they happened to be crossing paths. And Jesus said, right in a moment like that, we have an opportunity to be a neighbor. This is what Christians have come to refer to as divine appointments. These meetings of chance people, strangers even, who only when you look back do you look back and go, wow, only God could have orchestrated that. The way something happened right there, only God could have put those two things together. Only God could have placed us in the room together at that moment. And those moments are moments where you look up and you realize, maybe I'm being called upon to do something right now. Maybe I'm called upon to be a friend. Maybe I'm called upon to be nice. And maybe I'm called upon to carry the conversation, right? Can I just say something? If you've never been the person carrying the conversation, you should try a little harder, okay? I'm killing myself up here. Just joking. But sometimes it's your job. I'm going to be the person who carries the conversation with this person just so I can be a neighbor in this moment. And then when we look back, sometimes nothing happens with that. Sometimes you look back and go, wow, God placed us there for a reason. And I hope that when we find ourselves in those moments, we will say, yes, I will be a neighbor to this person right now. Dallas Willard, not you, Dallas, a different Dallas, but you might want to listen. It's fun to read people who have your same name. He says this, in the morning, we cannot yet know who our neighbor will be that day. The condition of our hearts will determine who along our path turns out to be our neighbor. Our faith in God will largely determine whom we have the strength enough to make our neighbor. Because people are difficult. Sometimes it's hard to say, yes, I will be your neighbor today. And so that's the first question. Who is my neighbor? The answer is, it could be anyone. You could be in the DMV of all places and be in a divine appointment from God. Now that's kind of a run-through of the broad stroke of what the Bible teaches about being a neighbor. I actually never did that say before. It's pretty fun for me to look into this week. But here's one of the things that actually sometimes falls under the radar when we start talking about this. Who is my neighbor? Could be anyone, a divine appointment. Sometimes when we talk about being neighbors, we overlook some of the most obvious candidates on the face of the earth. The people we actually live next to. See, no one's happy about this. I can't tell you how many times I hear people basically bragging about how they just don't care about their neighbors. I don't talk to my neighbors. Who cares? I'm not going to do that. But if we do believe in divine appointments, that even in a moment of crossing, perhaps, God has placed us in this spot so that he can make something cool happen, why would where we live not be a divine appointment? Why would where we live, where we ended up setting down roots for however short or however long a time we're going to have the roots there, why would that not be a thing where God's going, hey, there's something cool that could happen right here in this neighborhood because of where I live and where you live and where we all live? And we tend to just overlook our actual neighbors. And we go, well, my neighbor is anyone who I choose to love today. But what about our actual physical neighbors who were the original candidates for this conversation? And here's one of the reasons why I think it might happen. I think that you and I tend to have a mastermind complex. This idea that I have my goals, I have my plans, I have my reasons for being here, and I'm not going to focus on other things because right now I'm just here for this moment or whatever. But here's what the book of James says, James chapter 4, I told you we get there eventually. It says this, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this town or that city and spend a year there and we'll carry on business and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this and that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant scheming. All such boasting is evil. And if anyone then knows the good they ought to do, but doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Now, this is an amazing passage for me because it's right in the middle of James teaching Christians about interacting with other people. Like he had just gotten done saying things like, hey, who are you to judge your neighbor? And he's going to talk about how to run a business and how to pay the people to work for you and how to interact with people at work. And now he's saying this right here, going, hey, those of you who pretend like these cities are just places you just go to for your own little thing and then you're going to get out, even if that's true, even if that's what you're going to do, why do you pretend like you can build this giant master plan that you're going to live through and not ever focus on what God might have put you there for? Instead, we ought to be asking if it is God's plan. If it is God's plan, what does God want for me here? I know I came here to get a degree, or I know I came here to get some experience and I want to go back home. I know I came here because there's no work in my hometown, so I came to Winston or whatever. But you have a plan for coming here, but what do you think God's will for your life is? What if you ending up in this city was part of a divine appointment that God has had for, even if it's a short amount of time? Do you realize that even in my tenure here, I've been here for a year and a half, we've already had people come, become parts of our church, have some life change happen, and move on. That's how quickly it can happen. That's how quickly you and I don't really know what tomorrow holds. And Jesus says, and James is saying, I think one of the reasons that you and I fail to engage in the here and now and say, hey, I'm here and I'm going to just jump all in, is because we assume it might be a brief stay. Well, I'm only here for this, and then my next place, I'm going to set down roots in my next place, or I'm going to get my next house, and that's going to be where I really invest or whatever. And James is going, he has the exact opposite logic. He says, because you don't know what tomorrow holds, because you don't know what you're going to be doing in the next year or two, that's reason to engage right now. That's reason to get involved right now. Look at the two points he makes right in connection. Verse 14, verse 17, he says, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Something could happen to where you'll have to if you try to make a promise about tomorrow, like, I don't know, maybe I could take my kids to swim at an elder's house this weekend. You know, and you can't. Steve had to tell me not to bring my kids out yesterday because he couldn't even make a promise about tomorrow, all right? Actually, that turned out to be really nice, wasn't it? Yesterday, I was on the way, and we had to turn back because he said, it's raining. Sorry, you can't come. And we didn't get to go swimming. And because you don't know what will happen tomorrow. Now, that's one thing he says. But then he says, if anyone knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin. Somehow these two things go together. What is he saying? The potential brevity of what our current situation is not reason to disengage. it is reason to engage and to engage now. Raising kids is a vapor. It's going to be shorter than you think. That's not reason to not raise your kids well. That's all the more reason to give everything you've got now. Being married to someone till death do you part is a vapor. It's going to be shorter than you think. And one of you will bury the other. That's not reason to not engage. That's reason to engage right now. Some of you are only here for a short amount of time. Some of you grew up here. Some of you don't know what's going to happen next. None of that matters. At this point, you are right here. You're living where you live. You have the people you have in your home. You have the family, you have the neighbors, you have the people in your life. Let's get engaged. Let's figure out how we can love our neighbors. Let's learn about them. Let's ask ourselves real questions. What can I do to love the people in my life, the people that God has put right there in and around my house? How can I love them? A couple years ago, two authors, Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon, wrote a book called The Art of Neighboring. And it was a okay book. It was a good book, but it was, they didn't write it because they were wordsmiths. They wrote it because they had an idea they wanted to share with people. And so, it's a not, whatever. And so it was a good book. But in it, they gave this helpful chart. Let's go to the next thing. Where they have this chart here. And they just say, look, all right, draw this on a sheet of paper. Your house is in the middle. And then ask some serious questions. What can you say about the people who live in the houses surrounding your house? What are their names? What are their kids' names? Where do they come from? Where do their grandkids live? What are their phone numbers? What are some hardships they go through? Could you text them if you needed to? Could they reach out to you if they needed to? Who are your neighbors? Now, I actually live in a kind of a thoroughfare, so the bottom three don't apply to me, but the one on the right, that's Sheila. She's the one that roasted me in front of church people in my house because my yard got too long. She said, sometimes I wonder if you can see grass. I go, no, I can see it. Whatever. Eating my food. And I was like, okay, whatever. And now she needs me to help her. We'll see. Okay. See if I put your bird bath back together next spring. So I did. I lifted a bird bath back. Whatever. Her husband died in 2009. Same year they bought the riding lawnmower she drives and mows every day, every week. And still, I didn't know you could get services on your lawnmowers, but that's pretty cool. So the guys come and fix it for her. She goes, just talk to your people. I go, I don't have people like that, Sheila. I'm sorry. The next one up, her name's Sheila. I've never been surrounded by more Sheilas in my life until I came to this town. I have got a lot of Sheilas in my life, and I don't know what to do about that. She does lawn work. She grew up in Rural Hall. Actually went to a Christian church out there and has a lot of family at Pinedale. Couple houses down, got Patty. She tells me if my cats are sick because she's a cat lady. She's a cat lady. I don't know another way to put it. Terry lives next door to me. His daughter has special needs. He's a teacher. And you know what? I've had 0 spiritual conversations with them. That's fine. Hopefully one day it'll come up. Hopefully one day they can end up here. Actually, they came to one event and didn't tell us, and they left before I even saw them. The only person they saw was Sam. I was like, Sam, tell us if you see our neighbors at the thing, whatever. And so it was a learning moment. I had a teaching moment with my son right there. You tell me if people show up to church. And and that's okay. Maybe some of your neighbors end up as a part of our church. Maybe they end up becoming Christians. And maybe that's something you look back on and go, wow, I can't even believe what God has done through this connection of just living next to each other. Or maybe all that happens is that your neighborhood becomes a more livable, more enjoyable place for the time that you live there. It becomes a little bit more of a community the time you spend there. And I think that would be worth it. I think it'd be worth it. One of the questions we want to start asking in our minds as a church is this: how can the community here at Foothills Christian Church not only participate in the community life in general, but also make it better, make it more enjoyable, make it a little bit more like a community that people get to experience some sort of relationship with. And if it's on our shoulders to make it happen, let's take the mantle and let's do it. If no one else is going to say, all right, I'll go first, then why don't we say, fine, we'll do it? Because God has placed us where he has placed us for a reason. And there's a whole lot more going on in the communities and in the schools and in the workplaces and in the neighborhoods that we live, work, eat, and play in than simply that we live, work, eat, and play there. I don't care where you end up going. God's got a plan for you. And even if it's going to be a short amount of time, that's all the more reason to jump in now. Military people, band, go ahead and come up. You're about to see how ill-prepared we are to get into this next song. Bradley's missing. I don't know where he is. And I kicked a bottle that Dallas left there. I don't normally preach with a handheld, so you're getting a little more of this, like, is Garrett at a nightclub right now, just talking to people? You know who's excellent at this? Military people. People in the military know wherever they go, they're not going to be there long. And so you might have shown up to Winston or Louisville or Clemens going, I'm not going to be here long. I know it's not going to be a long time, so you might know that like a military person knows it, but what you don't know is what they know, which is the next place they go is not going to be for a long time either. And so what military people do is they show up in town and they jump in. They find a church, they get involved. I started a life group once because the military guy just basically forced me to. He's like, when are we going to do a life group or what? I go, I guess, maybe, I don't know. And then I'm leading a life group because I just met a military guy. They just jump in. They find an adult kickball league and they jump in. They find schools and they jump in. They find communities and they jump in. We had some military friends on our block in Savannah when we were first married, me and Megan. And I met them one time. We met them one time, and we were immediately on their trivia night team. Every Tuesday. We're like, how do we end up here? It was like, I don't know. Because they're just good at this kind of stuff. They just jump in. And the question is, are we going to let our plans get in the way of us jumping in? Or are we just going to jump in and see what God can do through us in this community? The question is not about God. It's about us. Are we going to jump in